Welcome back, welcome back. The long list of aid commitments to developing countries which came out of the G8 meeting in Germany highlighted the richer nations' apparent determination to beat global poverty and disease. It included a commitment, they said, to give at least $60 billion to combat AIDS, malaria and TB. Why then did the one man who's done more than most others put together to highlight the issue of global poverty describe this whole outcome as a total farce? He is Live Aid and Live 8 organiser Bob Geldof, and I'm delighted to say he's with us now. And that's the crunch point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why was that 60 billion not generous?
Because it's double counting. Most of this money had already been contributed or had been committed to. I have to say that none of it has been forthcoming. They own the real money out of the 60 billion is 2.4 billion, which would arrive, new money, which would arrive in 2010, which is the final year of the Gleneagles G8 commitment, that we would double aid to Africa by 2010. That will be $25 billion of new money, which is kind of what Africa needs if it's to arrive at the Millennium Development Goals. The 60 billion of new money isn't new. The only amount that's new out of that is $2.4 billion. That's deliverable by 2010 if it ever arrives. So you're looking at maybe 10% of the total committed in 2005.
And why this outcome? Because certainly poverty is more on the agenda anyway, people these days and so on. Why such a disappointing result? Do you blame a general state of mind or individuals?
I blame Italy and Canada specifically. They blocked everything. I mean, they will deny it to you, but they did. And I think the British went there desperate to get real figures now on the progress from Gleneagles. And largely this agenda has stayed on the top table. Whatever you think about Blair and Brown, the reality is that without them, this doesn't stay on that top table. I mean, I think personally they're committed to this for whatever reasons. And I know for a fact that Blair really strenuously argued very, very late into the nights for there to be real commitments, and this was essentially blocked. Figures in the communique. Figures are the key, because if you look at the communique, it says we confirm, we reaffirm, we wish to, and then at the second last line, if you have the communique, I'll point it out to you, however, is always there. Now, Canada, bizarrely, came up with the 0.7 figure that all these activists go on about to arrive at the Millennium Development Goals, which the UN all voted for, which is to have world poverty by 2015. Canada came up with the figure, we need to get to 0.7 of our total national incomes, the world's richest countries, to arrive at this Millennium Development Goals. The Gleneagles Compact was the roadmap to get there. We need to get to 0.51 by 2010, or else we don't get to 0.7 by 2015. A failure to enact Gleneagles means a total failure of the Millennium Development Goals, which every government signed up to. That's why it's important. Canada, the only country in the G7 which Stephen Harper as Prime Minister boasted in Berlin for the 10th year running had, you know, exceptional economic growth, unique economic growth. The only country in a budgetary surplus in the G7 was blocking real figures. Don't ask me why. Prodi was blocking for Italy because they say their economy is in a very bad shape. Having said that, they just received a tax windfall of 33 billion euros. Now, their commitment to Gleneagles, I think this year they had to pay 900 million euros. From 33 billion, they could have done it. The others are forthcoming, but unless you have a total agreement, you know, they're happy to go behind the laggards.
And what would you, realistically speaking, what would you like them to have done? Exactly what would you like them to have done, or would you like them to do
It's like
in future?
I'd like one government in the world to do what they say they will do what they promised. That's what I'd like, just once, just once. You pointed out that there's hundreds of millions of people who seem to get this issue, and why they get it is because the world, thank God, has never been wealthier or healthier ever in existence. And if you take Europe alone, it's the healthiest, wealthiest continent in the planet. And we've arrived there from 60 years ago when we were bankrupt, ruined and starving. Now, a continent 8 miles south of us, Africa, is ruined and starving and bankrupt. I know there's Africans who say, no, we're making progress. Yes, they are. Africa this year will enjoy 6.2% growth continental-wise. Compare that to Europe at 2.2. But for them to get out of extreme poverty, they need to have annual growth of 7%. And the reason it's difficult is because the rest of the world keeps accelerating away faster. Yet here's the contrast, the wealthiest and the poorest. Yet we managed to put ourselves out in 60 years. Africa will too. It will do it by itself, but it needs to prime pump its economies. If we are concerned with the nightly pornography of poverty that we see across our tea time tables displayed on our television screens, if that does bother us, and it seems to, then the way to do it, it costs a minimal amount of money for the 7 richest states in the world. So what I'm saying, specifically me, others may disagree, is that regardless of a successful or a negative outcome of the Doha trade round, we must have a standalone trade deal for Africa. It is an anomaly in the world economic net, and we need to pull it back into the net for it to explode, and explode it will economically once it gets back in.
And what about the people who take a different view? Well, I mean, this is much more optimistic than you, but it's not great anyway.
Yeah.
But The Guardian said, seen from the perspective of Gleneagles and the high hopes of the anti-poverty campaign, last week's summit was a disappointment. But it is worth pausing for historical perspective, remembering how the world's economic power brokers used to do business. That longer view gives real grounds for optimism.
I think that's generous. What I would say is that Africa was never on the agenda, but it's such an anomaly now in the world that the two single greatest political issues at the beginning of the 21st century, without question, are poverty and climate change. And they're the same beast, because climate change will affect the poor first and hardest, and they've done the least to contribute towards this situation we find ourselves in. And if you can bring the extreme poor out of poverty, and that requires massive shifts within Africa itself, which no one outside can do. They must adjust to it themselves. Then we can begin in a global manner to deal with the issues of climate change, which are in turn affecting the trade disputes which need to happen. So they are all completely wrapped in. And I don't, Pace the Guardian, I don't think it requires great minds to look at the world today and say, what are the two greatest problems we face? There are local wars that may spill over into supranational entities, but right now, globally, the only way we can deal with these things is for everyone to sit down at some sort of top table, and the G8 plus the G4, as they call them, Brazil, India, China, Mexico, they stand as part of this.
And do you think, in your lifetime, that you will see a victory, not an outright victory, the poor are ever with us, as they say in quotes.
Yeah.
There can't be that perfect a world, but a relative victory over poverty, is that credible?
I think it's credible, but it'll be relative poverty you have instead. A relative victory is a good phrase, but I do think that, I think by about 2040, when you see a genuine shift in the world economic power, I think America by that time will be number 2, China number 1. I think Africa, by definition, will have entered this big club. And the definition is that, it has a huge workforce but because of its comparative advantages, its poverty in that case, vast resources, enormous resources which the powering economies require right now. So huge investment coming into Africa, but African states have to be strong enough to take a view on this and withstand outside forces. I'll be dead, but by 2040, unfortunately, I'd love to be alive. I'd love to see this staggeringly beautiful continent with these immensely dynamic, creative people, walking tall and proud amongst all the other, industrial nations of the world. That would be good. But it also requires a massive effort from the Middle Eastern powers, who are doing absolutely nothing to contribute towards it. Really nothing. They are as disgraceful as any other government.
Bob, thank you very much. Well, neither of us may be there in 2040, I suppose, but you've got a good chance.
If I keep drinking this coffee.
Keep you up to it. Well, now, in a moment, Lebanon. Is the prospect of a UN tribunal looking into the death of a former Prime Minister set to make things better or even worse? That's after this very short break.